Hi folks, welcome to another edition of our videocast, My Life with Robert Burns. We're pleased to have you with us. Jim Thompson and Douglas Mackenzie here to have a chat with another of our cronies. Hiya Jim.
Hi Douglas, hi everybody.
Today we're joined by a crony who's a poet in his own right, and he's also the organiser and compere of the Scottish Poetry Slam Championships. Cronies everywhere. To tell us about his life with Robert Burns, please welcome Robin Cairns.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Thank you, Jim. Right, Robin Cairns. I was born in Clydebank many years ago, 1960. I was born in Clydebank. I was actually born in Newborough in Fife, but my father, being a bit of an explorer, decided that Clydebank was going to be the place for him. So we moved when I was about 1 year old. I had very little say in the matter, but once I was 16 or 17, I had all the say in the matter. And I got out of the place. But no, I mean, I did leave when I was 16 or 17-year-old, and I went to London, as many misguided young men do, and with a view to studying Buddhism and playing in punk rock bands, both of which I achieved, but one of them faded before the other. That was the Buddhism faded out of my life quite quickly, and so I played in bands, and I learned the business of working on building sites and gardening and whatever jobs came along to make ends meet. In this period, I was already writing. I'd been writing since I was as a young man, while I was still at school, and I was doing poetry in my teens in London, and people persuaded me that this was something I should be doing in public, and put me on the bill at poetry nights, and there was a modest amount of success. People seemed to like what I was doing. From there, I drifted into theatre. I was offered an acting part in Fringe Theatre in one of the theatres in London. It was, I believe, which one was the first one? I think it was the King's Head in Islington. And for 2 or 3 years, I was involved in theatre in London, then came back to Glasgow and was involved in theatre here, both writing, performing, going to the Fringe in Edinburgh with plays, directing shows, and the whole business of Fringe theatre. We had some success. Our version of the War of the Worlds. Now, the War of the Worlds was, when I say that, I mean the radio broadcast by Orson Welles, which panicked America, and he broadcast War of the Worlds as if it was a live event, and this is in the 1930s, and it was so realistic that people actually panicked and started driving out of the cities. So we made a play detailing both the broadcast and the effect of it, and that was a successful show, and made the Time Out list of things that had to be seen in London that week. So we were never making a great deal of money out of it. We had a fine time and modest success. I worked in journalism. I worked for music magazines, and notably the Scottish Cricketer, which is, let's face it, a niche magazine. Especially with the 6-week summer that we sometimes get here. So that is the first part of my career in writing and performing. I also played in bands. The most notable one would be Cairns and the Cattle Prods. Tasteful country punk band, and we played the pubs and clubs of Glasgow and surrounds, and had a fine time to ourselves. Life goes on.
I'm trying to imagine, you talked about punk bands when you were in London. I'm trying to imagine a Robin Cairns with a Pink Mohican or something like that. Was it that kind of style of punk?
No, that was later. I was a wee bit earlier. It was really black hair, leather jacket, short black hair, wee bit spiky. But no, I never had a Mohican, and I was actually very few photos of the period, but we tried to look quite stylish. We were one of that kind of punk band. We were not the ones who wanted to make ourselves look like the ugliest guys around, because we were still interested in the possibility, maybe, that girls might be interested in us.
It seems a bit of a leap from the religion. If you went into Buddhism.
Well, it was a thing that I drifted into in Glasgow, and then I went and pursued it further in London. But Well, it had aspects in the meditations which they could give you an awareness of yourself which you didn't have before, just by sitting, considering quietly, the world around you and your place in it. But in the end, it was a bit of a cult, and strict and meaningless rules, and it had a very controlling side to it, and I saw through it reasonably early, and within the year, I had drifted away from it. I did learn good things from it, but the cult still goes on. It's still there, and it's across the world now, but it's had its scandals, and I'm glad.
Yeah. We came across Buddhism in Thailand. My daughter worked out there for a year, and we went to visit. And the only thing I could say is all the Buddhists I ever met were lovely people.
Well, I wish I could say that, Douglas. And the ethnic Buddhists, people who have grown up with the religion, that's a different thing entirely. But in a sense, it was largely British misfits, and people searching for another way of life, and some of them found what they wanted there. And myself, no.
Yeah, but you eventually moved back from London because presumably you didn't find what you wanted there and came back to the west of Scotland.
Yes, I came back to Glasgow, probably about age of 22, 23, and just started working in theatre, and we had some great times. At one point, we put on the entire works of Shakespeare over 4 days and nights in what was the huge hotel called? The Flash Hotel at Anderston, where all the footballers used to stay.
Marriott.
No, it's before the Marriott. It maybe began with A. The bands and the footballers all stayed there. It's not been knocked down long ago. That actually slips my mind. But we did over 4 nights in the foyer there. A group of about 8 of us staged the entire works of Shakespeare as a publicity stunt. I mean, it's not a great quality event when you're tired reading Shakespeare, but we got lots of press coverage and television coverage for that. And for the next few months, whenever we did a show, we had great attendances. It was in the days of Mayfest, and that was always a great event because you could put on shows running right up till midnight and get great attendances because the city was busy, and it had opened up in a way which in the 70s never happened because everything closed down at 10 o'clock in Glasgow in the 70s. But in the mid-80s, there was a slightly more European feel to the place, and took part in that.
Well, my fellow interviewer is a great Shakespeare fan, so I don't know what he would think of doing all the works of Shakespeare in such a short period of time.
It'd be extremely difficult, I would imagine, in the first instance.
We took it in shifts.
I mean, shafts.
Yeah, well,
I can't get my head around it because having watched like going to Henry V or something, it's a hell night out.
Oh, I know, it's hard work, but I mean, we were going 24 hours, of the day, with 4 of us on, 4 of us off, 4 sleeping in a couple of rooms up the stairs, and 4 doing the stuff in the foyer. Michael Kelly, the Lord Provost at the time, came and took part. I think he played the gravedigger in Hamlet. I think that was possibly the peak of his acting career. He was a great provost, but not a great actor.
And you're married to Karen, who's an artist. When did that start?
Well, we met just around 1999, so when I got married at the age of 40 in the year 2000. And Karen was a practicing architect at the time, and she had wanted to go to art school and be an artist. But her father, who he's got his head screwed on, he said, no, but you can go to art school and do something practical, like you can be an architect. Because he saw being an artist as a bit too sketchy an idea, whereas an architect was a solid profession, and him being a joiner, he had quite a lot of respect for architects. So Karen was working as an architect, and she told me that she'd wanted to be an artist, and I prompted her to start again, bought her the bits and pieces, and she began, and it's proved to be a fantastic thing to do, and she sells very well, mostly through Scotland Art, the large gallery in Bath Street, who have a huge internet presence, but also at galleries all over Scotland, from one just outside St Abbs. We've got one in Aberdeen, one in Bearsden, galleries in Edinburgh, St Andrews, everywhere.
Well, my wife's a great admirer of our Duke of Wellington, which is in the background of the wee monologue you do about the guy learning to climb the statue.
Oh, you've watched that? That's very nice. That's good. Yeah. Yes, that is one of Karen's paintings. And when you say that, just to explain to people, I've recently been making a number of films on YouTube. Some of them are my poems, with them shot in the workshop here where I operate, and others I've been adding to that with YouTube films about some of the history which I've studied and which I speak about. And made a film about a painting in Kelvin Grove Art Galleries called The Druids Bringing in the Mistletoe, which is by Hornell and Henry, two of the Glasgow boy painters. I made another film recently about the writings of Alexander Greek Thomson, whose writings we find are incredible. Not only is he a fantastic architect, he's a brilliant writer, and he's got a 19th century transcendental mysticism about him, as well as a great technical ability to write about his architecture. One of the things he says is that no man who has gazed into horizontal distance has no conception of God. So what he's saying is that instead of seeing God in height and in steeples, he sees it in horizontal distance sweeping away from him to the horizon. And it's a fantastic thing when you see that and you look at his architecture. So I made a film about that recently, and these are all available on YouTube on the Robin Cairns channel if anyone would like to have a look.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the Greek Thomson one. I learned quite a bit from that one, that things about Glasgow I didn't know, so it's very good. But let's go back a bit. I first came across you, Robin, when you were doing the comparing the last night at the Rio Cafe, which was a real Glasgow institution. So you can maybe tell us a wee bit about that.
Well, for a decade, I ran a poetry night at the Rio Cafe in Partick. And the Rio Cafe is a pub come cafe during the day, and it's a bar at night which you can get food, basic fish and chips. Fantastic place. Two friends of mine owned it, and they asked me to come along and run a poetry night, knowing that I did these things. And for 10 years, on the last Monday of every month, we did that. And I worked out, probably put on 1,200 different people to the microphone, you know. Wow. Because it was mostly an open mic. We'd put on between 15 and 20 people, you know, in the first part of the evening. And then after the interval, I'd have a poet, maybe of some more renown, somebody who's better known, getting up and doing a 20-minute or 30-minute set. And that's how the evening went. But it's great because what was best about it was giving a stage to so many people who hadn't got a stage for their voice. You know, people could go and maybe they'd just retired and wanted to write something about their work experience, or they'd had some horrible medical experience for themselves or their family, and they wanted to get that down, or they wanted to get up and express their humour, and they could do that and try it out at the open mic sessions. And I always say about Glasgow is that in Glasgow a good night out is where you can hear nothing but the sound of your own voice. It's a very Glaswegian trait, you know. You don't necessarily want to sit and listen, you want to take part, and in that sense I think we fill the hole, you know, in allowing people to do that. Voices of all kinds, all classes, all forms of education, getting up and having a go.
That led me to come along to see the Scottish Championships, which you compare, and that's absolutely fascinating. And the talent among the slammers is just tremendous. And so, how did you get involved in something which allows people to go towards European and world championships and such like.
Well, I'd started taking part in slams in the late 90s, and I did okay. I didn't do okay the first time. I did poorly. I came 11th, and I immediately went away and thought, right, I'm going to do better. So I went away and I worked out what it took to do better at slams, to up your level of performance and get the sort of thing that the judges might go for. Although you can never be certain in a slam. So that I took part in slams first, and then the chap who was running a lot of them, Jem, his name is Jem Rolls, English chap. He was based out of Edinburgh, but he hiked off to Canada to do the Prairie Tour, and basically seldom came back. He didn't come back to get to Scotland as a base after that. So I started running slams to fill the gap. Then I was asked by the I Write Festival in Glasgow to run the Scottish Nationals, and did that with them for a few years, and that went quite well. With big audiences, in the Mitchell Theatre in Glasgow, we had best part of 300 people in for the big event at the end of the year, and that's how it began. I parted company with the I Write Festival, and they've been running it in conjunction with the Tron Theatre for the last few years, and they are very helpful to me. And we always fill their big theatre for the January Saturday night that the slam is on. The quality and the talent, the wordsmith, mostly young people who take part, although we have had a winner who was 62-year-old, American chap called Young Dawkins, and he came along and stole the show. So it's not exclusively for young people at all, but many of the young people who take part have a very high level of skill with words. Maybe not the same level of skill with ideas, because that comes from experience. So we see brilliance and sometimes folly, from the people who take part, and that's good. That's a good thing, because learning in public is what performance is all about. The person who arrives with a solid act, at the age of 20 or 25 or whatever, and takes over the world is very, very rare. It's Mr. Burns who did that, nobody else. and we all have a lot to learn when we first step on stage and try and express our ideas. And the great thing about slam competitions is you're given a mark. And while you might not fully respect the mark, it will be giving a good guide to how well you went down. You don't have to say, well, because you came first in a slam, you don't ever say, well, I'm the best poet. If you come in the top 5, you say, did pretty well tonight, I'm on the right track. If you come in the bottom 5, you say, more work to do.
You talked about the Tron Theatre. The other theatre that you're associated with is the Panopticon. You're a great supporter there, and I've been at a couple of your monologues there.
Yes, well, the Panopticons are great. It's the oldest extant music hall in the world, built 1858 by W.E. Pickard. And Judith, who is the leader of the charity who looks after the place, she managed to wangle her way into the building when it was almost derelict in the mid-90s. And since then has worked very hard towards restoring the Panopticon Theatre in Argyle Street in Glasgow to its former glory, and we're close. The building is wind and watertight now, and the new stage is in. We've got good facilities in many ways. Heating is still poor, but that can be tackled. And what I do there, I both put on shows there, my own plays. I also take part in the music hall shows. I'm often the compere, and we will put on 10 or a dozen music hall turns, usually on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, and empty Argyle Street into a theatre.
I love the fact that on a cold day you get issued with a warm hot water bottle to put on your lap.
I can actually claim that was my idea. Yeah, there was one day I was doing a show there. It was about the 1st or 3rd of April or something, and the temperature outside was -1, and inside the theatre it was +1. It was hopeless, you know. So I went out, I found a cash and carry that did mini hot water bottles about 6 inches high, and I bought, I don't know, 100 of them or something. You know, they were less than £1 each, so it was, and we filled them from the tea urn, you know, and handed them out to everybody as they came in. So you had a hot water bottle to at least attempt to keep warm while you sat. And the thing is, I was probably doing a funny show, and if people are sitting there chittering, they're not going to laugh, you know. It doesn't work. They only laugh when they loosen up. The only thing about that, though, was after the first show, when it went quite well, and people handed back the hot water bottles, somebody, the guy, I think it was Ian, emptied them all back into the tea urn to heat them up again for the second show, an hour and a half later, and then he switched it on, and someone else, Andrew I think it was, came in and made himself a cup of tea, yeah, and he was drinking his tea going, oh man, this tea tastes a bit rubbery. You want to see his face when he realised he was drinking hot water bottle water.
And another of your characters that I heard at the Panopticon, you took to the Edinburgh Festival, because you're a regular there, aren't you?
Yes, I've performed at the Fringe in Edinburgh in my 20s, and for the last 15 years, apart from last year and last 2 years, of course, including this one, I've been regular there, mostly with a series of plays about a character called Morningside Malcolm. Morningside Malcolm is a mild-mannered and respectable chap from the nice posh suburb of Edinburgh, Morningside, but his lovely daughter has married into a family of Glaswegian gangsters. A lot of the humour comes from the clash between the rather rougher culture of Glasgow and the respectable Edinburgh culture. So I've done 6 different plays about these characters, and I'm now recycling them and sort of revamping them each time, because the thought of sitting down to write a 7th play about the same characters is one too many.
I remember that, I think the first one I went to was in the basement of I think it was the Royal Oak pub.
Oh man, really? Oh.
And I think the main thing I remember about it was that it was so short a space that we ended up sitting on each other's knees.
Yeah. Oh no, that was a sweat box.
Yeah, and the only place I've been that was smaller than that was in reference to Jimmy Law, who you mentioned earlier on. And Jimmy did the festival a couple of years ago, and he was in the basement of a sort of vegetarian cafe place, and shared the basement with a laundry. So,
what, no sausages?
So that was a bit unusual.
Yeah, no, I'm surprised if you came to that show and then you've come back to see me after that, Douglas. To be quite honest, I don't think that one was very good. That was I think that was the first Morningside Malcolm show. That must be best part of more than 10 years ago, and hopefully they've improved since then. I usually play these days. I've played for a number of years at the Outhouse, which is a jazz bar just off Broughton Street, and I played at the Jazz Bar in Chamber Street. They were great venues. But recently I've started playing at the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre in Palmerston Place, which is slightly off the beaten track, but it's a lovely big place. It was the house originally for the McEwen brewing family, and it's grand. It's got a huge sweeping staircase and a glass dome above it. Wonderful place.
Well, I hope I've successfully managed to segue you into Edinburgh. And perhaps we can move on and talk about what influence Robert Burns had in your life. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about Burns' time in Edinburgh as well. So I'll pass over to Jim to get that started.
Okay.
Robin, as usual with people, where's your first contact with Burns and when?
My first contact with Burns will have been, well, my grandfather in Fife was interested in Burns. My grandfather in Edinburgh was interested in Chick Murray, yeah, but I didn't know my grandfather in Fife very well. I think he died when I was 11, and no Burns at school. There will have been hints of it in the Boys Brigade, you know, here and there, and I'll have picked up songs at church events. I grew up in and around the Congregational Church in Clydebank, and that's when life revolved around it when I was a kid. And but my first real engagement with Burns, I remember in London, sitting around a table with my friends, my cronies, young men and girls, and somebody suggested that I read Tam O'Shanter to them. So I did, and I knew it. I mean, I've obviously read it before, because it was not the first time I've read it. Can't remember the first time. But what I realised at that point, there were all ears for the first minute and a half, and then the language put them off. You know, they were English almost entirely, and they couldn't get it. They couldn't get the language. And to be quite honest, there were bits of the piece I didn't get either, even though I managed to read them. I really didn't know those words. Being from Clydebank, and you can hear my accent. You know, it's not deep Scots. I've lived abroad. I've lived in England, and the amount of actual vocabulary of Braid Scots, which was in use in Clydebank in the 60s and 70s as I grew up, was pretty low. I mean, we had our own expressions for some things, but we didn't have the Ayrshire dialect. We didn't have the Doric of Aberdeenshire or anything like that. So I realised at that point that this is the finest piece of literature, of poetic literature Scotland is ever going to produce. And there's a problem, because most of the world doesn't get it at first listen. They're actually going to have to look harder, take the time to do that. So, bearing that in mind, I remember we did a performance of Tam O'Shanter, myself and another actor, when I was about 23, 22, and we toured it around schools and around Glasgow. And he acted Tam, and I acted everything else. You know, just a two-man show, very, very easily moved. And I think our set was 2 bar stools. But we had a lady who played ragtime piano, and she played ragtime piano under the rhythms, you know, like Scott Joplin songs. And we did that, and that's when I first really started studying what Burns was all about. From there, playing music, I picked up on a lot of Burns songs, and that Burns had single-handedly saved Scottish song from oblivion. And in my readings, I read Robert Ferguson, saying that and music's deed in his famous poem, meaning that at the time that Ferguson was writing in the 1770s, Scotland was still suffering from the fact that so much culture had been stamped on after the 45, with the banning of the kilt, the banning of the playing of the fiddle, the banning of the bagpipes, the banning of the Gaelic, you know. And this it meant that Scottish culture had been, well, crushed, and by the victors over the Jacobite rebellion. So, understanding these things, I've looked more into Burns over the years from time to time. I've been asked to do Immortal Memories here and there, and at the Panopticon Theatre we do Burns Night every year. We usually do 2 nights in a row because it's so popular, and within that I do a potted history of Burns' life. I speak of, in 2-minute sections, I speak of his time as a teenager studying under the schoolmaster in Kirkoswald. I speak of his time at Mossgiel Farm. I speak of his first visit to Edinburgh, riding up the Cowgate on a borrowed pony. I speak of his Duchess of Gordon, and how her caustic wit, and how Burns, in meeting her, came across educated women, maybe for the first time, thoroughly educated women, and how that would probably set him on his heels a little. And that's one of the things that I explore more in the play that I wrote, which is called The Lost Weekend of Robert Burns. And The Lost Weekend doesn't suggest drunkenness, just put that out there right now. It's not about that. It's trying to imagine the last weekend which Robert spent in Edinburgh, which is January 1789, isn't it? Yes, it is. He's wooing Agnes McElhose, mostly by letter because he's hurt his knee, and he's making plans to move to Ellisland Farm, one of Lord Glen Cairns' cronies has given him this opportunity. And he hasn't written much for the last 2 years because he didn't write much in Edinburgh. He wrote the Haggis and not a great deal more. Lots of letters, of course. But the body of his poetry is done and dusted. And his great achievements in poetry, apart from Tam O'Shanter, are arguably mostly behind him at the age of 29. And so that's what the play is about. It's about the quandary Burns finds himself in. He's been flavour of the year in Edinburgh, but I don't believe that he's going to be the flavour of 3 years. Going round the drawing rooms again and performing and to all the people who want to see him has worked out great again for the second year, but both Burns and everyone else knows that the kind of fame which he has, the absolutely stellar fame which Burns experienced, which is why we know so much about him. You know, we know nothing about Robert Ferguson, yeah, apart from his sad end. With every wrinkle of Burns' life we have at our fingertips. It's in his letters, it's in other people's recollections, and he's written autobiographically about it in his own poems. So that, yeah, if I see Burns in a massive quandary at this point in his life, and that's what The Lost Weekend of Robert Burns, my play, tries to tackle.
I mean, you're a contemporary poet of some renown, I've got to say, in Scotland. You know, what's a poet's view on Burns the poet?
He's the boss. Right, let's get that straight first, okay? A poet's view on Burns as a poet is that he has the magic trick, which many poets have. If you read George Mackay Brown, who was a pal of my uncle's, he used to drink in his pub in Orkney, and they have a Norman MacCaig, the great Edinburgh poet of the last century as well. If you read them, I don't include myself in this, they have a wonderful ability to give you some information, take you to a place, describe what's happening in the place, give you the feelings, the characters, and then they do something magical. They step back, like a pan shot, moving away, like a drone shot, moving away, and you look down and you see the thing in perspective. And the poet gives you the perspective to look at the particular aspect of life that they're concentrating on and give it a wider depth and meaning. Burns had that. Burns is not a comedian. I would say Burns very seldom does what you would call a punchline. I mean, okay, the standard Habby has a certain punch, it has a delay and deliver at the end of it, but it's not like a comedian's punchline. Burns is a serious person. You know, he's not a performing monkey like me. You know, I mean, he is there to take you into his world, show you the pathos, show you the beauty, you know. And he's a very serious poet. You know, when he goes in a lighter vein, Tam O'Shanter it's a delight. It's frothy, it's wonderful, and its seriousness is well hidden because it's such an enjoyable thing. Seriousness comes from the remains of his relationship with religion, and that the old gods and devils can still scare him despite the fact that he's a man of the Enlightenment, a rational man, and maybe feels he's put all that behind him. but the old folk tales come out the woodwork, you know, when the candle starts flickering, and he takes us into the scary world of Tam. But it's so lightly done. And the other aspect, when he is very funny in Holy Willie's prayer, is biting satire. You know, that has a very serious purpose. He wants to get his own back on the people who humiliated him by making him sit on the stool at the front of the kirk and condemned him for a fornicator. So that is probably my view of Burns. His beauty is his ability to dance around a subject and show us the glimmering facets of it, and then to step back and show us the depth and clarity of the human condition.
Have you got any particular favourites of his works?
The song "John Anderson, My Joe" is just one of my absolute favourites. I love Tam. You know, I used to be able to do Tam O'Shanter, you know, off by heart. I haven't had cause to do that in recent years, so I can't do it now. But John Anderson, My Joe is a wonderful, wonderful piece. You know, and what he saved it from. I looked a few years ago into the traditional versions of it, and some of them wouldn't be sung at the worst rugby club. Yeah, really, it's filth. You know, it's grubby. You wouldn't sing it on the way back, you know, from a. I mean, it was about. No, you wouldn't sing it at the worst rugby club. I'll say no more. And so what he's done is he's saved it. He's taken out the really earthy and filthy aspects of it, because some of the verses in the originals are just terrible, and he's made it into something. You know, the idea that we've climbed the hill together. We will have, most of us have our partners in life, and life is a climb, isn't it? In many respects, certainly when you're younger, you know. Then obviously it gets for most people it becomes a bit more even ground as they get older. But we must totter down together at the end and lie together at the foot.
Well, as mentioned quite often, you are a poet and well known in certain circles in Scotland. So, any chance you can give us something of your own?
Yes, of course, I would be glad to, gentlemen. That'd be wonderful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to transport you to something that you know, you two will know very well. Excuse me. I'll take you to a Burns night. Imagine a Burns night. The dark, windy, scary night. A spooky night. A spooky Burns night. Imagine that, please. It helps if you both go woo. Woo. The ode to the haggis recited. The music fades and dies. The ceremonial cut is made. And then the haggis replies. He says, "You've got me, you bandit, right in the tripes. Oh, you glaikit glowering swine. Now you divvy me out to these worthy types, slavering here to dine. As I die, the licht diminishes. Murder! I'm fading fast, but I'd know have you drool over drawn out finishes. These words will be my last. When the stalwart stabber stove my chest, did you fancy you heard a squeal? Did your heart go out in sympathy? Did you feel for your imminent meal? Well, you have that in common with a poet lad in whose honour jibbed a lie. He had a conscience quick to the plight of whatever wretch took his eye. So, field mice in peril, wounded hares, mountain daisies, and ancient mares enjoyed the blessing of Robert's pen. For the good it done them, I dinna ken. As I die, my hot breath grows thinner. Farewell, turnips, I'm slipping away. But don't think I'd keep ye back from your dinner. I have only one more thing to say. Is there a doctor in the house? Yes. What am I to guess? Never slow to seize the chance to stretch his old string vest. And is there a lawyer at the table tonight? Oh, well, to heaven I hope I go, as I'm told you can't get near the fire for your colleagues down below. Teacher, a banker, a preacher, oh, the well-heeled are out in their masses. But if yous are out here, there are none left, I fear, watching o'er the working classes. Good people, please, don't bristle at my talk. I'm no one for garrulous gabbing. I'm a dying pudding. I merely mock those who cravenly sanctioned my stabbing. Oh, there's me speaking out of turn again, a loud-mouthed pudding midst professional men, like yon fractious poet with the caustic pen, which he used to goad those and such as those, as are held in high regard by themselves, if by others somewhat less. But that must include our bard, for his stint at the Inland Revenue, a calling more loathsome and black than shyster, book learner, Bible thumper, moneylender, or quack. If a man is a man for all that he is, that surely indulges his crimes. And a gentle scourge only Burns took to himself, the exciseman in straitened times. But if mice, mares, and hares are as worthy of rhyme as the assembled well-to-do, the question arises, who should sup and who should be broiled in the stew? Oh, this is revolutionary talk I'm into all of a sudden, and no man wants to hear a lot of sedition from his pudding. So, oh, stabber staunch with your grumbling paunch, from the chief of the pudding race, set to your dinner, I'll no call ye sinner, us pudding's no our place. As I die, my hour is nigh, but like Rab, I merely mock. And if my words have withered your hunger, mind now, a haggis canny talk.
Oh, well done.
Thank you.
The audience didn't know you were an actor. They certainly know now.
I know, I can't help it. Just an old ham.
And getting us back to acting, before we finish, you talked about the play of Burns' Lost Weekend.
Yes.
Perhaps we could finish off with you telling us a little bit about that. And is there an excerpt you could give us?
Yes, I've got a sort of two and a bit minute here that I'll do. It begins with a song. The scene is the Crochallen Fencibles. We know that many of you will know about the Crochallen Fencibles, a drinking gang in Edinburgh who met in one of the alehouses off the Royal Mile, and their name is it's many of the drinking clubs had false sort of regimental names, like the Crochallen Fencibles, which is named after I'm explaining things to Burns people here. Almost all of you will know that the Crochallen Fencibles is it's that old joke, you know, where the chap is showing to his prospective wife all the land and all the things that he has. And look on the hill up there. Look at all the cows I've got. And she's peering up into the mist saying, "Oh, you've got a lot of cows. You must be a rich man." But they're actually deer. So the Crochallen Fencibles is one of the drinking clubs which Burns attended in Edinburgh in his winters in Edinburgh. And the lads are all singing a rousing song, which hopefully we'll get in. And
centuries glory, as
then, I am William Creech, Robert Burns' publisher. He's in attendance at the Crochhallen Fencibles. As the nonsense of drink intensified, I observed my colleagues hectoring our bard for an opinion of their song. Burns gave a fair impression of serious thought, praised the ferocious volume we had created, and the sense of battle in our squabbling versions of the melody. We had certainly let loose the doggerel of war. He crisply insulted us. Burns had been pretty sure his talents were unique. The day he rode into Edinburgh on a borrowed pony. Meeting what passed for the city's literati, had swiftly made up his mind. Oh, now William Craig was begging Burns to write a foreword to his own terrible poetics. These I had read. Grim drivel. The pages best hung on a privy wall to await a fitting end. But Craig being in a position to pay handsomely, soon to be published by myself. Then, from a rammy at the doorway, came a shout for Burns. "Robert, a lassie! A lassie with a letter!" The crowd, hearing the messenger was a girl, bayed for her to show herself. Sensibly refusing this invitation, she was, I fear, bundled into the room. Just a serving wench. A shawl round her pale, downcast, pretty face. A face I thought I had seen before. "My mistress asked me to gie you this, Robert," said the girl. "Urgent, mind." The crowd vowed and hooted at what this might mean. Burns came forth, never breaking the steady gaze with which he met the girl's concern. The letter he took, but without a glance, secreted it deep in his waistcoat. "Jenny Clow," said Burns, taking both her hands, "these gentlemen call me a poet, and will be much displeased if I quit their company without a display of my prowess." Then Burns spoke. Burns spoke, and we listened, even those who couldn't tell a poem from a pan of porridge. As Burns spoke of love, his love, how he, when the time came, would love the woman he took for a wife, truly love her. The heart of the man beating in the tempo, the flame of his soul in the cadence. His pauses filled by our own stirred longings, losses, memories. His hands never leaving hold of the girl's, and his eyes searching hers with soft wonder. Words complete, he shared his coat around her shoulders, and whispering, led her away. "Now that," I said, "is what I call a trick." I wonder how long that took to perfect.
Very good. Excellent. So when will we get the opportunity to see the whole performance in its entirety?
Well, when this blooming COVID thing finishes, isn't it? It's the play. It's 1 hour 20 or 1 hour 25. I've only done a few performances of it, but because it was ready to go, and I did it 2 summers ago, and then I had to go to the Fringe, and then did other things, so I didn't actually get a good run of it. And soon, I suppose, maybe at the Fringe next year, or I'll certainly try to get a run of it for a week in Glasgow at some point. Though, to be honest, I mean, I've been with the Panopticon, and where we're allowed to go in and we can now go in and tidy the place up and work on it. The thought of I think we're still far from having a crowded theatre full of people sitting next to each other.
So at least we've got something to look forward to, because I think that will be an attraction for many, many Burnsians. And I'm sure people listening to this will be looking forward to the opportunity.
Thank you.
So we're kind of running out of time. So, Jim, is there anything else we want to ask Robin about?
No, this has been different again. I keep saying every week I say the same thing, but this has been unique.
That's nice. Thank you, lads.
Fantastic.
I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and I have to say it's a great honour to be invited to take part in events by the new Cumnock Burns Club. One of the best.
Well, we're glad you think that way, and we certainly enjoyed your performances anytime you were at New Cumnock Burns Club, and I'm sure you'll get the opportunity to come and see us again in the not too distant future. So, this leaves me to say thank you very much, Robin, for your time and telling us about your life with Robert Burns. Thank you very much.
Thank you.